going to talk about the relationship of neuro-linguistic programming to an approach that I've been developing for 30 years with my wife Grace Ann. It's called PERVIEW, PERVIEW.org. Now the goal today is to demonstrate how, neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, which has been around for a long time, how those techniques can be applied to coaching veterans, first responders, and their family members who could be experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, or burnout, some kind of stress, or it comes with the territory. These are the people who serve America and around the world. Now, NLP started with Richard Bandler and a psychology student named John Grinder, and at the University of California, Santa Cruz. They combined their expertise to create NLP by modeling the therapeutic techniques of effective therapy, including Virginia Satir, family therapy approach, Fritz Perls, Gestalt therapy, and Milton Erickson, hypnotherapy. Now they had the meta model, right? And their publisher, their first book was Meta Publications, so I think that's one reason why it's called the meta model. And they had the Milton model, which was built on the work by Erickson, Milton Erickson, on hypnotherapy. So both of these approaches have been around since the mid-1970s. Now, PERVIEW, PERVIEW, is only been around since the 1990s. And my wife and I have been developing it in support of veterans and their families, first responders like police and firemen and paramedic and their families. You know, let's face it, there's a lot of violence and stress in America. It's not a war zone like when I was in Vietnam, but you know, I was a sergeant in Vietnam. I'll tell you more about that. But it has a number of things going on. So let's just say that the first book by Bandler and Grinder was 1975, The Structure of Magic, Volume 1. And then the next year they did another one, Volume 2. And it's a very foundational approach that they've created. So in their book, they explore the hypnotic language of Milton Erickson and the meta model that they developed themselves. Right? So we got the Milton model, it's called now, and the meta model, and they do different things. So I want to announce that I'm in a coaching program and getting a coaching certificate from Genius Unlocked, and I'm learning a lot about NLP that I never knew before, and it's an exciting experience. I recommend it. You can find them on the website, on the internet. And I do the PERVIEW, which is PER, stands for the 7 Steps of Embodied Restoring. So it's the process of embodied restoring, PER for short, and then we put that together with the view part, which we'll get to shortly. And just to run through it, since this is mainly about neuro-linguistic programming, I want to give you some idea of how it all works. There's 7 steps in the processes for embodied restoring. First step is characterize. Characterize the client's emotional state. You know, you don't use that language with them. You just say, hey, tell me about a time when things were going well before what we'll call the problem saturated account. Now the whole thing about this approach of PERVIEW, PERVIEW, is that we don't want to go down the rabbit hole and reliving the trauma and the stress again and again. Now I'm a Vietnam veteran. I had post-traumatic stress disorder from Vietnam in a couple of ways. The mortars, the constant gunshots, you never knew if a mortar round was going to come onto your person, and that would be the end. So there's a lot of stress from that, just being in a war zone. I had a squad. I had an M14. Others in the squad had M16s and grenade launchers and the M60 machine gun. Man, that thing could really fire. But the second source of my trauma in Vietnam was a captain. We'll call him Captain Breeze. Not quite the pronunciation of his name, but I think you'll get it. Anyway, he was a champion weightlifter. He could lift 450 pounds. He could deadlift that. And he could put about 320 pounds over his head. So he was a formidable character. Now, people that lift weights, they can be really good people, good Joes. But this guy was a sadist. And he just harassed the Vietnamese secretary there. And he harassed me as the company clerk. I was like Radar in the movie MASH, except I had this Captain Breeze who was constantly banging me in the back of the head and just hitting me when I wasn't looking. So I'm always like, had this stress reflex that I still have today. And it's just from that past trauma. So one of the things we do in the 7 steps, we characterize the time before the trauma. Well, before Captain Breeze, there was stress in Vietnam, but I wasn't burned out. After Breeze, I burned out. I went to the hospital. I mean, it was just too much. Overworked. I was putting, that guy, if I wasn't constantly typing, now's the time for all good men to come to the aid of the country, now's the time for all good men, he would thump me in the back of the head and just start yelling and screaming. And, it was easier just to type, even though I did my morning reports at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. in the morning, so they'd be on his desk when he arrived after 8 in the morning, after a nice breakfast he had. I had to look busy all day long, and so did my Vietnamese secretary, Miss Gang. And I won't go into the details because I don't want to drop down into the rabbit hole. So what we're doing is a set of 7-step characterized life before, and it was pretty good. I mean, it was pretty good without that Captain Breeze. Now, externalize, separating the trauma from the individual identity. So from my identity, since I'm telling you my story. So we'll call it Captain Thumps a lot in your head. Captain Thumper, we'll call him. All right? And sympathize, building rapport and empathy. So we get externalized. We gave Captain Thumper a name, and I'm the one being thumped. So I guess the label should apply to me. Being thumped, Mr. Being Thumped, that was me. So instead of talking about me, I'll say Mr. Being Thumped, so I don't have to go down that rabbit hole. Sympathize. Well, what did you learn from that experience, David? You must have some reason to keep reliving it, keep telling these Vietnam stories. Well, I learned a lot. I was 21 years old and in charge of $1 million budget and hundreds of employees in the military working part-time, and Vietnamese employees, keeping track of payroll and doing the morning report and doing personnel assignments. It was a big job for a 21-year-old, And, okay, so now we're going to rehistoricize. We're up to step 4. We did characterize, externalize was 2, sympathize was 3, rehistoricize. I'm going to find little while moments in that experience, even during the period of being thumped a lot, by Thumper. So I'm keeping it light here, not going down the rabbit hole, so I can actually remember the good times. I enjoyed working with Miss Kang. She worked hard. We went out to eat Vietnamese food every once in a while. Boy, it's hot. I'm not talking about the ones in America, really hot peppers. Anyway, I learned a lot about doing payroll, and I learned to type, and later on this would serve me well in going to college and typing reports for the various classes, term papers. So if I've rehistoricized, I've gathered up a number of little while moment wins where I didn't fall into the rabbit hole of the trauma, and actually learned some cool things, that I could persevere, that I could bounce back, that I could get healthy again even after a nervous breakdown. Yeah, it was embarrassing for a while, but now I help people that have nervous breakdowns and face trauma in their life. And how do we do that? Well, we go to the next step, which is to strategize, right? And we did characterize, externalize, sympathize, rehistoricize. We're revising. We're changing the meaning of the narrative, and I'll show you how that applies to NLP in just a second. We're strategizing new steps into the future. We're changing our view. VIEW is part of PERVIEW, PERVIEW. And we're going to publicize, help the client publicize, like I decided I would read a book a day, and I would work with people that were supporting me in my new story of going to college, being the first one in my family tree to go to college. Now, what's interesting is we can use NLP to address the concerns, that I'm investing in a new future, and as a counselor or coach, I could say, okay, I agree that change can be unsettling, and at the same time, this new story approach could solve many challenges in your life that you're facing. So I'm demonstrating how to use the Milton model here and the meta model of the restoring from NLP. So for example, we can chunk up, generalize. So if I'm externalizing, giving it a label, I'm jumping up in my view and chunking up to generalize about a broader purpose, like learning from these challenges, traumas, or having a sadist boss, And how does this align with my current values? Well, I'm very interested in leadership that's very supportive and not sadistic, for one thing. And chunking down, what specific step can you take today? So this relates to the publicized part of the embodied restoring approach, or what we call the processes of embodied restoring, PER. We can get into the details of it, like learning to type is a good skill if you're going to go to college, be the first one in your family tree. Perseverance is a good thing. Now we can use lateral chunking. How is this situation similar to past successes? So that's right out of the little while moments approach that I've been working on with Grace Ann Rosille, my wife, for 30 years. And what's the role of lateral chunking? Encourages creative problem solving. For example, how can I help veterans, first responders, and their families? Because I've been there, done that. I've got trust from that client group. They trust me because I speak their language, and I've had the experiences, and I can relate to their experience. And I know how not to go down the rabbit hole, relive the trauma again and again. So Erickson's hypnotic language, for example, now we're doing the Milton model, Milton Erickson. I'm helping them see desired outcomes when they felt confident in the past, and how they can bundle up a number of little while moments experience of confidence and extend it into their future. Nominalizations, exploring their potential, giving it new purview, as I call it, new interpretations. So I'll say, okay, now you can relax now. We're not going to go down the rabbit hole. We're not going to relive that experience. Oh, okay, good. I'm tired of reliving that experience. Good, because we're going to have a path out of that. So Purview is a movement, everyday veterans, first responders, and their families face to hidden wounds of trauma, overwork, burnout, stress. I mean, it's it's amazing when you start talking to people about the level of violence they've experienced in the United States, and you start talking to police, firemen, veterans, paramedics. Uh, Veterans experienced it overseas, but here in America, it's the police, paramedics, firemen that are experiencing, and they need experiencing, and they need purview, and they need neurolinguistic programming because it really amplifies the results of the PER, process of embodied restoring, and the view, vibrations and energy waves. I'm talking about a quantum phenomenon here of working with emotions, thoughts, and actions of veterans and first responders and their family members. I've done coaching with 10-year-old boys and girls that are family members of first responders and veterans, and they really need to do their own work. I do a lot of sand tray work because if you've ever worked with veterans, my grandfather was a veteran of World War One. My father, a veteran of World War II and the Korean War, and I'm a veteran of the Vietnam War. And we don't talk about all the nitty-gritty details of what we experienced and watched in terms of violence, and we observed. And I can tell you, reliving an event of violence over and over again is like crashing your car into a wall, going to the hospital for months. And a therapist said, well, let's relive that accident again and again and again and again. Now we're talking about here the work of myself and Grace Ann Rosille in Purview and the neurolinguistic programming. We're working with the emotional energy waves, the thought waves, very into the quantum approach. We have an annual conference on quantum storytelling if you're interested. You'll find out more information about this. Look us up. But we have a movement here for healing trauma through the science of, a better methodology that's evidence-based, and we're completing some new approaches to grants where we hope to fund additional research, by the way, if you care to donate. People have the ability to bounce back from trauma. They don't have to stay in it. And the work of Richard Bandler, the psychology student, and John Grinder, the linguistics professor, creating neurolinguistic programming, and then working with the results of Milton Erickson's hypnotherapy. I'm not hypnotizing you right now. I'm just saying that by helping you dream of events where you can move on from trauma, and you can learn to coach people moving on from trauma, it's a kind of a hypnotic effect, right? And we're helping them change the view of their own representation of their beliefs and their memories, and we're using meta programs, and we're revising meta programs by what I call the restoring of their story filters. So if they said, well, I'm not competent now that I'm back from a war zone, or I'm stressed out as a first responder. But NLP explores how neurological processes of language and behavior patterns are connected, and we can learn coaching that from Genius Unlocked with the neurolinguistic programming, and I also teach coaching using the Purview. We're raising money on Amazon. If you can find our Kindle book, it's $7.77, very cheap. But the hardbacks and the softbacks are $250, and that's because we're raising money to pay for the tuition. We have a GoFundMe project as well at the purview.org website. I hope I've given you enough information to whet your appetite for learning more about neurolinguistic programming applications to coaching veterans and their families and first responders and their family, because it affects the whole family. It's contagious, in an energy sort of way, right? So a first responder veteran gets post-traumatic stress disorder, right? And they're bringing it home, plus the institution of the military says, hey, man up, don't burden your family with this. And they tell the family the same thing, hey, don't burden the veteran with any of your problems. So you got all these people pretending they don't have problems and that they shouldn't be talking about it because the military model says don't talk about it. Well, yeah, here we do talk about the label of it, but we don't go down the rabbit hole. So this has been hopefully some introduction to you, if you haven't had it before, of neuro-linguistic programs, authors and definitions. My own case study is an example, and we can chunk up into generalizing a new view of the situation, chunk down into the details where we need to, find little moments of exceptions, but not go down the rabbit hole. We can use lateral chunking to figure out, hey, I learned something in Vietnam. Even though I had some misery, I became a clerk typist. I became an ACE student, ALA student in college, first one in my family tree. So yeah, now I'm helping people. So that's lateral chunking. I'm helping apply the 7 steps of the processes of embodied restoring. I've been working on restoring story filters just, ever since I got back from Vietnam. Went to college, all the way through college. And I've published about, if you count the encyclopedias, probably 45 books, and a lot of journal articles in some really top scientific journals in my field. So all of these approaches are entangled, quantum entangled, the neuro-linguistic program and the purview, right? Now critics say neuro-linguistic programs are pseudoscience, but I'm going to challenge that and say, as an empirical person, as a scientist myself in the behavioral science, social science, I'm going to say there's some new statistics out there, and probably some of these studies that have not found anything in neuro-linguistic programming, and including, probably 20 studies, and then all the meta studies that didn't actually study anything but read the papers of the people who did study it, and in some cases tried to reanalyze their data sets. Well, they're using a primitive statistics, and maybe they haven't measured the right thing. I believe in neuro-linguistic programming, and that is a good companion to Purview, and it's important, I think, that we redo the science and get better measures, because I believe things are going on. If you believe things are going on, put it in from neuro-linguistic programming and help veterans with Purview approaches to embodied restoring and getting a new view on their stress situation, on their memories. We don't have to keep reliving the memories. War's over. Okay? We don't need to keep fighting it anymore. And that's true of all the other wars since then, and the veterans. And they need our help. And so, hope you didn't mind my tapping along with the video here. Sometimes that shows up in the sound. Okay, so if you want to learn more, go to Genius Unlocked. You can learn all about neuro-linguistic programming. There's other places you could learn it, but I found good value from what they're teaching. And that's why I paid the big money to take all the classes. And it's a program where there's things to do every week to build your business, coaching business for me, and certifying coaches, and there's things to do to learn how to manage your business, be profitable at it. There's learning the coaching techniques in NLP and other approaches, such as expanding your intuition. So I'm going to cut it off there and just say